Hello everyone, welcome back to another conversation. I wasn't expecting to return to this particular topic quite so soon, but there is a comment that YouTube withheld that I do want to at least partially address. Now, you'll probably I have a guess as to why this comment was withheld. To the original commenter, whose name I will not reveal for their protection, they sound like a Sneeko fan. I don't know if they are, because to that commenter very specifically, I don't know what the full comment was. The way that your comment was structured, you had your first two sentences, you put one sentence, hit enter, put another sentence, hit enter twice, three times more actually, if I remember the size of the comment correctly, and then you put in also, and then YouTube cut it off from there. So whatever your second point was, I didn't see it, and I didn't want to restore the comment really quickly because, or at all, because if I'd responded to it, it would have remained permanently on the video, and again, you sounded like, based on the first two sentences, a Sneeko fan, and I didn't want you to be targeted for some reason based on that. Again, I'm not here to deride or demean the manosphere. It's just illogical. I'm actually going to be getting into that because the second sentence of that comment, which is that men are waking up, is just factually untrue. Alright, now really quickly, before I go into my problem with the idea that men entering the manosphere are waking up and why I disagree with that statement, let me first lay out a couple of broad points. Now, I've already covered sort of the development of incel ideology and how it's become part of the movement or the manosphere, depending on your personal preference for a term for it. And the idea that men are waking up is very specific to a subcategory of that, which is the red pill philosophy. This is the idea that society is trying to throw a illusory world in front of men to convince them of something that varies a little bit depending on who you ask, but broadly speaking, the claims are that society is getting women to have higher standards, and that it is trying to repress men, and that it is putting this absurd emphasis on wealth generation. Now, there are parts of this that a lot of the ideas that the manosphere twists into supporting their message have some basis in reality. The problem here is that they take those core facts and they create a completely unrelated problem that they sell the solution to that won't actually fix the real problem here. So in other words, they're taking the facts that are causing actual problems, but they're interpreting it wrong. For content creators in the manosphere, they are intentionally interpreting it incorrectly. Again, to sell you a solution to a problem that you didn't actually have. I'm going to be talking about the three larger points, and I'm going to be using Andrew Tate as an example because he is the most visible example of this. However, I want you to be keenly aware that I am only choosing the manosphere specifically for its visibility. This applies almost word for word for the womanosphere, which is also developing, and only just now are people beginning to talk about it. And this also applies to other victims of similar spheres. For reference, and for your edification, there are such things as gay cells and trans cells. Involuntarily celibate people who are gay or trans. These exist. There are Reddit communities for these. There are Reddit communities named these. And they are not named ironically. I just want you to be aware of the fact that this is not just a male problem anymore. This is a problem for everyone of every identity. I am, again, to repeat, using the manosphere for its visibility, and the fact that it has a larger audience than the rest of them. Now, on to the three largest claims of the manosphere. There are smaller claims, I'm going to pass over those. The three big ones should be enough to prove at least the major issues with the manosphere here, at least specifically with their interpretation of facts, and prove that they're trying to sell you the solution to a fictional problem. Now, at the beginning of Tate's pipeline, he correctly states that society represses men emotionally, which is true, and that is why more men are becoming depressed. Very true. This, in turn, makes it harder for men to connect to women. Very true. And that women's standards have been increasing due to feminism, and this is another reason men cannot get relationships. That's half true. I'll get into that in a bit. It's just not true in the way he claims. And then finally, that society is pressuring men to bring home the bacon, so to speak, to really become super wealthy, and this is part of women's increased standards for men, is that they really expect men to be super wealthy. This is not really true. Again, I'll get into that in a bit. The first thing I want to point out here is that despite Andrew Tate's pipeline starting off with all of these statements, as you progress through his pipeline, as you watch his rhetoric and ideology develop until his, what I'm going to loosely call retirement from social media, but it's not really that true, but anyways, he eventually progresses to the point where he denies depression exists and that men just need to get over it. He allows himself as the personification of what a man should be, which is exactly what he claimed society was pressuring men to be. He, according to him, gets bitches, he's pretty wealthy, he's physically very fit. He is, and he also judges other men on these exact parameters. In other words, he is reinforcing the very things that at the beginning of the pipeline he was criticizing society for encouraging in men. This turns around, of course, by him claiming that society is trying to make men weaker, which also isn't true. I will get into that in a bit. So I'll actually be going into 3.5 points really here. But let's go back to one of the... let's go to the subject first off that I've talked about in part 3 of Incel Ideology, which is the idea that women's standards have been increasing for men and that women expect men to be Adonises, basically. This isn't true, but I can see where young victims of the manosphere could get this idea. I'm also, by the way, simultaneously going to be talking about the claim that the manosphere typically makes that society is valuing them based on their sexual prowess. This isn't correct, but this is a point where I very easily understand where they're coming from on this, because I fell into this for a brief period of time earlier on in my childhood. Okay? I'll get into that, but I can understand where they make their mistakes on that, because I made the same mistakes, and there's a couple of other pitfalls involved there as well, but I'll get into that. So first off, the idea that women have increased expectations for men. Yes, but not in physical appearance. Men have not physically changed that much over the course of the past 50 years. They've gotten a little heavier. Testosterone's gone down a little bit. Fair enough, right? But these aren't huge changes. Additionally, a woman's preference for a guy's physical appearance, again, as I mentioned before, is not the only thing that a woman considers. Women put, again, less emphasis on physical appearance, but the reason why a lot of boys, particularly, make this mistake that they assume that women are expecting more out of the physical category is because a lot of guys obviously are interacting with girls at a young age in their teens, right? They're getting their crushes in their teens, they're having their first loves in their teens, and guess what everyone's going through at that point? Puberty. Guess what's raging at that point? Hormones. Why am I bringing this up? Because at this particular period of time, the teenage years, while women do place less emphasis on physical appearance than men, both place a higher than normal emphasis on physical appearance at that point in time. Again, we're talking hormones, we're talking, oh, they're really attractive, and that's, what I'm really looking at here, because the hormones are raging and off we go, right? At that particular point in their lives, the teenage years, it's half true. Women are placing a higher than average emphasis on physical appearance. Now, where they go completely off the rails is when they claim that as women age, their standards get lower. This is the incorrect interpretation of the facts. What's actually happening is women are maturing, as are the guys, as they get older. Most people do, unless you're a politician, in which case you're just always a child. But anyways, back to actual people. As people get older, they mature, and they want different things. As both men and women mature, they both place less emphasis on physical appearance. They are more concerned with character and personality. It is not that women's standards are decreasing. They are simply maturing and understanding that physical appearance isn't everything. I heard somebody once said to me, and I don't remember who it was, good looks might get them to open the door, but whether they let you in depends on what you say, and how long you're allowed to stay depends on who you are. If they don't open the door because they don't like how you look, just walk down the sidewalk with your music going, and if they like your music, they'll open the window and ask you about it. And then, depending on what you say, they still may let you in, and depending on who you are, they might let you stay. Obviously, whoever said this to me wasn't meaning that physically, right? But you can kind of understand the parable there. But, parables aside, that's the first thing, right? And again, this also fails to account for the fact that women are interested in all kinds of people. I mean, we've got dadbod hashtags, right? We've got DILF hashtags, silver foxes, right? Physical appearance is not everything, but it is easy to fall into that mistake in the teen years when there is a higher than average emphasis on physical appearance. Now, to get on to the subject of society pressuring men to have sex, this is not true, but I can very easily see how guys can fall into this. Now, first off, what is society pressuring men for? Because society is applying pressure to men, but it's not for sex. It's for a relationship. Consider media, movies, books, TV shows, even some games. The good guys, the heroic guys, in a vast majority of media, either 1, are in a committed relationship, or 2, are rewarded with a relationship at the end of the film, the book, or whatever. Right? That is how heroes are typically portrayed, particularly men. Any male protagonist who is a playboy or is unfaithful to a woman or isn't in a committed relationship and just bounces from woman to woman is typically portrayed as either being this vagabondy rogue type and therefore of dubious moral character, that's the implication there, or otherwise goes on a redemption arc where he falls for some woman and enters a committed relationship. It is also very common for a man's roaring rampage of revenge to be triggered by his true love of either his girlfriend or his wife dying. Very common plot thread. Right? All of these really emphasize a committed relationship as either a reward or some form of motivation for a man to do something. Okay? That is a majority of media, particularly movies. this tends to be a bit more obvious. And I mention movies specifically because it is in movies, which is probably the most commonly consumed, I would say, forum for romantic side plots. But in movies, this is very easy to confuse for being rewarded with sex, because a lot of movies, the guy gets the girl, but there's not really heavy indications in most cases that they're going to enter into a committed relationship. It is very easy for the interpretation to be, oh, they have an enjoyable night together, right? It's a very easy conclusion to draw there. Those movies in which the protagonist is rewarded with a relationship, if it's followed up with an epilogue or a sequel, they make that clear in a lot of cases, right? That it was a committed relationship. Maybe he's had a relationship with a woman, he actually had a committed relationship, but they broke up for some reason. That's fairly common, but nevertheless, they did have a relationship, a serious relationship. But not all movies have an epilogue or a sequel in which that is clarified. So it's pretty easy to misinterpret that, right? Very understandable. Another thing that can confuse a guy on this point is the period of a man's life, usually running somewhere from 18 to 21 for a lot of people. Sometimes it's a little bit longer, but 18 to 21 is a fairly widespread period of time as far as most guys that I know of. This might be a little different for you depending on your cultural background and whatever, but there's a period of time in which a man is, where it is accepted for a man to, quote, sow his wild oats, right? He just kind of goes crazy, and if he, bounces from woman to woman, it's accepted and excused. Boys will be boys. But it's not necessarily encouraged. If you look at how a lot of people refer to it as, they just kind of laugh it off, and they're like, yeah, that's just men being men. He's going, he's finding himself or whatever. But very rarely do you see people outside of your family, perhaps, depending on your family, encouraging you to go sow some wild oats. A lot of the times it's just something that people will accept as an explanation for basically being a horn dog from 18 to somewhere in the early 20s. But it's very easy to confuse that sort of acceptance as pressure, right? Because a lot of people will just laugh it off and move on. But nobody's going to value you based upon how many women you've slept with. I've been through 6 different office environments in my work career, and I'm about to go into a new one in a couple of months. That's just the way my career goes. In all of these, the only question that people have ever asked me is, am I single? Or, alternatively, the slight variation of that, are you in a relationship? Nobody has asked me how many women I've been with. They have only been concerned about whether or not I am currently in one, either as a matter of curiosity or whatever. Okay? Unless there is a serious breach of workplace professionalism in your workplace, which there might be, and you happen to work with frat boys, or guys with frat boy mentality, you're not going to be asked how many women you've slept with. Except possibly by a date. Maybe. But in professional and in social situations, it really shouldn't ever be coming up. And if it is, there's a serious breach of personal space there. And I'm going to bring up something I've mentioned before. According to statistics, married men are more likely to be promoted and more likely to get raises than single men, and men with children while they're in a committed relationship are more likely than that to get promotions and get wage increases. Now, I'm actually not going to bother with whether or not these statistics are true. That doesn't matter here, because that is what mainstream news media has been talking about whenever they talk about lonely single men, whenever they talk about wages and stuff like that. That is a narrative put forth by these statistics that is quite often used in those discussions, whether it be about wages or about men in relationships, or not in relationships, as the case may be. So whether or not it's true or not doesn't matter. It's the narrative they want you to know, which is fine. I'll talk about that in a bit. But society isn't pressuring you or valuing you on how much sex you've had. Frankly, society doesn't care. Society just wants you to be in a committed relationship and pop out children, or produce children one way or another, for the express purpose of fueling the economy. More coals for the furnace. Now, that doesn't necessarily make life for men in the manosphere any easier, because at the end of the day, part of the manosphere's problem is, to use the Elden Ring term, their maidenlessness, right? So that's not really much better, but the problem is that part of the reason they're stuck in the manosphere, whether they've had sex before or not, is the fact that the emphasis on sex really skews your priorities and really makes it difficult to get into a relationship. Because I was encouraged to sow my wild oats from the years of 19 to 21. And I've faced pretty consistent family pressure to get into a relationship, and I've faced some pressure in the workplace to get into a relationship in most of my workplaces. It's fine. I don't care. But it's very easy to misconstrue that as being about sex when it is not. You could say indirectly it is through the medium of marriage, sure. That part, if you want to interpret it that way, that's fair. But the emphasis for society is on the committed relationship part, right? So, let's talk about society as a whole, right? Because obviously, again, there is the problem that society is pressuring men to get into relationships. Now, you might be wondering, because this is the same pressure that women face as well. A lot of women like to claim that men aren't pressured to get into a relationship. We are. Possibly more than women. Possibly. I don't know fully about the pressures women face because I am not a woman and have not been, so I don't know what that fully looks like. However, given that at least currently in society the expectation is on the man to approach the woman, the emphasis is on the man to supply the entertainment for the most part, typically a day, the entertainment for the day, so to speak. Whether or not you agree with that is fine, but societally, that pressure is on the men. Okay? At least at this point in time. That is changing. Do not misunderstand me. That is slowly changing, but it is still primarily on the guy to approach and initiate a relationship. So, with that being said, wealth. Yes. Society is emphasizing wealth, at least in America. Most capitalist countries do. That's part of the problems of being in a capitalist nation. Alright. That is true. That is the one completely true statement It's not women making that expectation. Women can be bamboozled by it just as men can, right? I've seen the clips of guys asking women what they expect a man makes, right? And they come up with some ridiculous number, which is, by the way, a clear indication a woman has been sucked into the manosphere, because the manosphere is really fond of grossly exaggerating how much men make, right? Because every time the manosphere points at men having an advantage in the workplace, they point to CEOs. And they don't make that clear because they're not trying to sell true narratives to the women victims of the manosphere, right? Same deal that the men go through. Same exact deal. Just the womanosphere can point to Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and say these guys are making like hundreds of thousands a year. You know, these guys are making millions a year, and the average man makes hundreds of thousands, right? They use the top earners that they can point to that people are socially aware of, and falsely extrapolate that men in lower positions in those companies make hundreds of thousands a year, when that is absolutely not true. But that is something the womanosphere does. Again, you would probably more likely recognize it as toxic feminism, but nevertheless, that's where that comes from, by the way. But most women are living in the real world and don't think that. But society is, of course, putting that emphasis on wealth. That is a societal issue, and the manosphere is correct on that. They're just blaming women for it when it's not women's fault. It's society pressuring men to be wealthy or die, basically. That's just targeting the wrong person, or the wrong group. Look at the politicians if you want to blame anyone for that, right? That is actually a political problem in America. Hell, it's a political problem in most Western nations. But anyways, but they are correct. They're just targeting the wrong people. Now, finally, I would like to address the final point here that I wanted to go over, which was, I'm going to go on a slightly different tangent here. I'm going to talk about a different point. Men in the manosphere like to claim that women have the advantage, that women can have anyone they want, and that women have it easier. On the same subject, women in the womanosphere like to claim that men have the advantage, and that men can have their pick of whatever they want, and basically they make the same claims. What if I told you both were right? They were just too broad in their terminology. Both men and women have specific advantages and disadvantages in society as it is today, broadly speaking. There are exceptions, of course, but for the most part, they do each have advantages and disadvantages, but in different aspects of society. Women primarily have the advantage in the social aspect of society. When a woman commits a crime, she is less likely to be criminally pursued. And even when she is less likely to receive as harsh a sentence. In other words, her sentence compared to a man committing the same crime is more likely to be a lesser punishment. So women get away with more. Whenever a man and a woman splits and children are involved, and even a lot of times when children aren't involved, the woman will get the majority of the stuff, and almost always gets custody of the children, even if it can be proven that she is the worse parent of the two of them. Even if it can be proven that the children would be better off with the man, she will still more likely than not get the children. Which, by the way, brief side note, just because a woman is a single mother does not necessarily mean that the man left them behind and abandoned the kid. Don't assume that. Yes, that happens. Yes, it's too common. But it is not the only explanation for single motherhood. But I'll get deeper into that in a future talk, maybe. But anyways, she is more likely to get the kids. She's more likely to get more out of that. When a woman accuses a man of something, mostly anything, she is more likely to be believed than a man making the same accusation against a woman. Alright? When women say something offensive or otherwise problematic, she is more likely to get away with it than a man will. In fact, the only aspect socially that a woman has a disadvantage in is in affairs. If a woman cheats on the man she's in a relationship with, she will receive more social rejection than he will. He will still face social rejection, except by his maybe really close buddies. Possibly. It depends on the moral compass of his close friends. But men will also face social backlash for this, but the reason why men face less social backlash is because they have less social standing in the first place. Men are also more likely to be villainized or assumed to be a villain as well in a given situation. If a misunderstanding happens, for example, and this is specifically an example, if a misunderstanding happens where somebody can be interpreted as an antagonist or an aggressor, the assumption will be that the man will be the aggressor, even if that isn't true. Finally, in the social sphere, while men do get, I suppose I should actually put a brief trigger warning on this. Brief trigger warning, I'm going to be talking about assaults here. With that being said, while it is true that men are less likely to be sexually assaulted than women, men are also less likely to be believed if they do report it or even tell someone. These are all the areas in which women have a social advantage. But men have the strong advantage in the business part of society. Men are more likely to receive raises and promotions, even if they're single, than a woman is. This disparity between promotion and wage rates actually gets wider as a man enters a relationship. If a man enters a committed relationship, he is more likely to get a promotion or a wage increase. A woman who enters a committed relationship is less likely to get promotions or increases in wages. Stack that again for a child. A woman who has a child is less likely to receive promotions or a wage increase. A man who has just become a new father is more likely to receive promotions or a wage increase, and this lasts for a majority of the child's early life. Men are more likely to be listened to in the workplace, even for the same exact suggestion a female colleague made in the same damn meeting. I've seen it, and the statistics bear that one out. Men are also more able to get a job. They have a wider range of jobs people will take them for, and they are more likely to be hired than a woman is. I am glazing over differences in racial status here because my focus here is on the manosphere. I am aware of the issues of racial status in all of these statistics as well. I just want to keep the emphasis on the manosphere, so it's man versus woman right here. But anyways, back to the main point. So we have all of that. Okay, now that sounds like men have fewer advantages than women, but quite honestly, the business advantages for men are absolutely huge in terms of the difference there. There are quite a lot of advantages there on that front, right? Just wait till you get your first couple of promotions. You'll figure it out. But both sides are correct. They just are too general in their claims, basically. That's about it. Women have the advantage in the social sphere, primarily, and men have the advantage in the business sphere, primarily. Again, this is slowly changing, but as of this moment, we are still looking at those advantages being present in those spheres for each side, and disadvantages respectively. This, however, does not mean that women can just have their choice of guys. Women are just as capable of having social anxiety, of being awkward, of not wanting to approach guys. In fact, women are even more likely to be afraid of approaching guys due to, of course, the long history of male-female relations. But at the end of the day, there are plenty of women out there who have this exact same problems as the guys in the manosphere. Again, there is a womanosphere, and it is growing. And it is growing for a reason. Ultimately, in terms of fitness, everyone should work on being the best that they can be. I will say that. I actually, in terms of its encouragement for fitness, I agree with the manosphere. Right? If you want to get fit, get fit. If you don't want to get fit, that is fine. But I tend to side on the side of fitness. Personally, I encourage everyone to pursue fitness for themselves, not for anyone else. And that's really the only thing I think in terms of fitness that I would disagree with the manosphere on. The manosphere really emphasizes the idea of getting fit to attract women. No, I disagree with that as a motivation. If you're going to get fit, do it for you. Do it for your health. Do it because you want to look good for you. Give yourself a kiss in the mirror, for damn sake. You should not want to improve yourself for other people. You should want to improve yourself for you. Alright? Even if you do improve yourself for someone else, well, I disagree with the motivations. At the end of the day, you're still improving yourself, so I'm not against it. I just disagree with the motivation. But again, to really quickly cover over just to make sure that I get this point very clear, there are certain subsections of male groups that do emphasize sexual prowess as your social standing. Again, boys in school, there will always be that group of guys who brag about how many women they've slept with. For women, by the way, this is slightly different. They brag about how many guys they could convince to sleep with them. Whereas in school, for guys, some social circles emphasize sexual prowess. For women, a lot of times, it's about the sexual allure. Mostly because the consequences of a woman having sex is more potentially severe, particularly in the teenage years. So it's based on allure rather than actual prowess, but the same thing can extend to college again, depending on the college you go to and how closely you interact with fraternities. Or sisterhoods, or whatever they're called. I don't remember what the women's version is called off the top of my head, I'm sorry. No, that term has escaped me. Sororities. That's the one. Yeah, unless you're going into college into a fraternity or a sorority, which I don't personally recommend because they're, with rare exceptions, they're pretty toxic environments. Again, there are exceptions to all rules. But I think the biggest problem both spheres make is that they take the minority and apply it to the totality. Earlier I mentioned that some women do completely live in fantasy land when it comes to the wages of the average man. These women do exist, obviously. The problem that the manosphere makes is that they take this minority of women who have delusional ideas about a man's income, and they claim that all women have those expectations. They do not. Women, a lot of the times, just want you to have a job. They don't often give any fucks about how much that job pays. Some do, and if they do, they're not worth your time. The minimum expectation women have for guys is be employed. That is it. Not kidding. For the majority of women, that's the minimum. The absolute minimum. Again, there are girls that emphasize money. Gold diggers, etc. Yes, they exist. But they do not represent even the majority of women. It is also, to also throw a statement out to the womanosphere, and this is something that the womanosphere likes to say, all men are rapists. No, we're not. But there is a given mistrust here of men, which I can partially understand. Again, the major news media really likes to push these stories of women attacked in park by crazed homeless man. We had the woman on the train incident a few years ago. I think it was 2019. That was very eye-opening in terms of where society is. But anyways, and yes, I can completely understand caution when dealing with strange men. Quite frankly, I encourage caution dealing with everyone. You might not know this, but this is a not-so-fun fact. A vast majority of crimes, particularly sexual assault and murder and assault, like actual physical assault, physical assault, no. Sexual assault and murders are more likely to be committed by someone you've known for a while. Or someone known to you, at the very least. Okay? Mainstream news media doesn't like to talk about that. But statistically, you are more likely to be murdered or sexually assaulted by someone you know. That might make you paranoid, and if it does, I apologize. But I can understand caution. I encourage everyone to be cautious. With everyone. No matter how long you've known them. Maybe I'm mildly paranoid. Maybe it's Maybelline. I don't know. But those are the primary issues with the manosphere. Again, the baseline... What basically the manosphere and the womanosphere are doing is setting fire to your house while you're asleep, and when the smoke wakes you up, they claim it's the neighbor's house that's on fire, not yours. And then they sell you a fire extinguisher to help put out your neighbor's house. That's what they're doing. That is entirely what they're doing. Even though it's your house on fire. Okay? Not the best analogy I've ever come up with, but it's what I can come up with at this time. But, yeah. That's the analogy I'll stick with. For better or for worse. With that being said, if you're in either the manosphere or the womanosphere or any subcategory of it, you are not awake. You are not awake. I'm sorry. I hope this wakes you up to at least that. And I'm not saying that society isn't trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. It is. Just not in the ways you think. Okay? I mentioned that the manosphere likes to claim that society is trying to emasculate men. It isn't. It doesn't care about how masculine you are. It really doesn't. The decline in testosterone is because of what we're eating. What's going through our bodies, the plastics, the chemicals. That's what's causing that. Good old-fashioned corporate greed is causing a decrease in testosterone. Society itself couldn't care less. It is trying to expand the definition of masculine to account for this problem. And it is a problem. But it's not a problem from society. Society is just trying to do its best to adapt to that problem. The problem is corporate greed, is filling you with who the hell knows what. And some of that who the hell knows what decreases testosterone. But not in you, in your children. Do some research. I will eventually give a talk on this, but I encourage you to do your own research. But with that being said, that's where I'm going to leave this off at. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. And thank you all very much for joining me. And have a great 24 hours.